Hello, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, and wherever you are listening in this wide, wonderful world that we're living in right now, you're very welcome to the Global Sales Leader podcast. I'm your host. I'm a sales strategist, sales coach, also sales relationship, because it's all about the relationship with the end users externally, but it's also how you build your relationships internally so you can all help and pivot going and moving forward. Today, I have a wonderful guest who has an extraordinary job and delivers exceptional results. And he's in an area that I'm fascinated with. And I read a lot of the stuff that my guest, Brian Ahern, has and delivered. But I'm also interested in about Brian as well. So, Brian, you're very welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm excited to be here, Jason. Looking forward to the conversation.
So a little bit more blurb about you. You've got a book called Influence People. Ironically enough, for all the audio people that are listening right now, Brian, and we were speaking before we came on, has a logo just behind him on a big, whacking great big screen. And what really adds butterflies into my stomach is the way that Brian has actually put my logo up there and my picture. That is just wonderful. And no one else has done that. So I thank you for that. That's really awesome.
Hey, I like knowing I'm a one of a kind, so I'm glad that it resonates with you and that it gives you butterflies.
Oh, it absolutely does. I just think moving the extra mile just increases the rapport levels and helps to connect. And obviously, connection and influencing people in an organic way is the area that you specialize in. So we'll talk about your books in a while because I'm sure we can pitch that a bit later. And I have a few banners to run across. So tell me how you got into what you're doing.
Okay. Well, it was completely by accident. And it's one of those things in life that I look at one thing I did and I'm like, wow, if I had not done that, the whole course of my career and really my life would be different. So I'll take you back. When I worked for an insurance company, I was involved with sales training. And somebody who had been in my department, she had moved on to another department, was studying for her MBA. She came and she gave a video to my boss and I. And she said, I think you guys will really like this. And it was Robert Cialdini presenting at Stanford University. And he was talking about ethical influence, how to use influence in non-manipulative ways to move people to action. Well, as he talked about that psychology, the light bulb came on. And I thought, that is the explanation for all of selling. It is why certain sales approaches work, why certain sales approaches don't. I mean, it clicked right away. And I thought, I need to learn more about this. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, I was really intrigued by the science. I thought I can get behind this. This is empirically proven. This isn't somebody's good advice. And then I really appreciated his stance on ethics, that we could do this in non-manipulative ways. So I signed up for Stanford's marketing materials because they had lots of other great resources. And one day, one of their flyers comes to my desk and I'm flipping through the pages and there's Robert Cialdini's picture. And in big bold letters at the top, it says bestseller. And right underneath it in bold letters, it says, call it influence, persuasion, or even manipulation. And I thought, I cannot believe they actually use that word because he's so clear about non-manipulative ways.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that changed my life, Jason. In that moment, I consider myself to be a good moral person. And I felt like that needed to be addressed. So I emailed Stanford and I basically said, I don't know anybody who is looking to be manipulated. I don't know anybody who wants to be known as a good manipulator. The word cannot be helping your sales, but it's probably really hurting. Yeah. Well, I never heard back from Stanford, but sometime later my phone rang and it was Robert Cialdini's office. And it was one of his representatives who said she was calling on behalf of Dr. Cialdini to thank me, that I had written an email to Stanford. And because of that email, they were changing the marketing of all of his materials. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. We had this nice conversation. And as fate would have it, she said, you know, if you are ever looking for a guest speaker, he travels the world and speaks about this. I said, I sit next to the woman who plans our events and books our speakers. Let me transfer you. And summer of 2004, he was in Columbus, Ohio several times and addressed the insurance agents. And that's what got the ball rolling in terms of my relationship and ultimately my certification with him.
Wow, that's really cool. Sometimes it's the right place at the right time, isn't it? That's the way the world actually goes. And you're obviously destined to do that because you just saw a problem in the messaging.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that Roger Dooley speaks about, the messaging and the friction and the frictionless.
Yeah.
So you've obviously identified that. So from that point, what actually happened after that?
So he came to our company several times that summer, spoke to the insurance agents that represented the company. And during that time, I went out to Arizona, my boss and we went through the 2-day workshop, the Principles of Persuasion. And I had to stay on my boss for 3 years to get the approval to go back and get certified. But I clearly saw we could take this psychology and use it internally to get people to do the things we needed to move the company forward. And then we could morph it into a sales training opportunity for the agents that represented the company. I got the go ahead in January of 2008, went out to Arizona, spent a week with Dr. Cialdini and the folks at Influence at Work, and there were others of us, but we went through the certification process, and the rest is history, as they say. Since then, I've been teaching, coaching, consulting, speaking, writing, all around the psychology of influence and persuasion.
So I like the way that you've really sort of learnt how to influence people, and especially your boss at the time probably took a little bit longer than you wanted it to, but you got there and you get certified.
I'm persistent. Somebody described me once who worked with me. They said, you're like a dog with a bone. You will not let go of it.
That sounds very familiar to me, actually. I'm like that. So the methodology that you got out of that to do some sales training, because this is the Global Sales Leader podcast, and I want people to sort of learn from this, but also for selfish reasons, I want to learn myself.
So, the methodology, the what we call Principles of Persuasion workshop goes deep into the principles of persuasion, the 6 principles that Dr. Cialdini introduced in his book, Influence, Science, and Practice. Where my expertise came in was teaching that, but also saying, here's the application in the sales process. And now what I've done is my second book is called Persuasive Selling for Relationship-Driven Insurance Agents. And it looks specifically at the sales process and talks about which principles are most effective, starting with your prospecting to your first meeting, qualifying, etc., all the way through the sales process. Because even when people learn this psychology, they may not make the connection about, oh, here's where I can apply it. This is how I'll use it when I'm presenting or when I'm closing. And so that's really my skill set, is how do we take this really interesting research and apply it in a business setting so that we get to better results.
So what's the first step that you would normally use? I know there's accountability, credibility, likability, sociability, and all that. So what would be the first step in a sales process to do this?
Well, at a high level, I think sales can be broken into 3 parts: building rapport or relationship, dealing with objections, because people may like you, but they still may have a lot of questions about what it is that you're offering. And then even when you've answered those objections, there's a lot of times there's a hesitancy, fear of change. And so it's closing that sale. That's very high level. And there are specific principles that are more effective at each of those stages. So for example, you want to build relationship or rapport, very good to tap into what Cialdini calls the principle of liking or reciprocity. If you're dealing with objections, you want to defer to authority, yours or borrowed authority, and you want to talk about consensus or social proof. What are other people doing? Because when people hear that others like them are doing something, it gives them confidence that, well, maybe that's the right solution for me. And then
apologies for jumping out, because I was just thinking, how do you actually frame the accountability then? So how does that work? Well, and the authority.
So authority, I would say, is a little different than the accountability. The authority, we say that people look to those with superior wisdom or expertise, right? When somebody knows, Jason, that you're really good, really smart, and expert at what you do, they will listen to you more. The other part of that accountability for you is also being trustworthy, because it does no good to be an excellent at what you do, but people can't trust you, because then they're still not going to want to do business. So you have to build both expertise and trustworthiness to really be considered authoritative. But on the accountability part, when you get to the closing the sale, the principle of consistency and scarcity are very good for moving people to action. Consistency is where that accountability can come in. If I tell you what to do, you may or may not do it. And you may have a lot of excuses for not doing it. But if I ask you and you commit to me, that becomes the accountability, because I can always go back to you and say, Jason, where are you with this? You told me that you would get this done, or you would get me this information. If you put that in writing, that's even stronger, that it's a kind of a public testimony that, you committed to do this. So by moving away from telling people what to do and asking, and once you've made that commitment, most people don't want to say one thing and do another. They just don't feel good internally. So that's a huge part of accountability, is to tap into that principle of consistency.
And there's also something I've read many a times is using the linguistics because. So the cue for this using the photocopier when we get back into the office or whenever. So you state it and you frame it in three different ways to jump the queue, ironically enough. Mm-hmm. But you're using the language because within that, to get yourself in there. So I think the last point was I need to use the photocopier because I need to make some prints for my boss. So once you added in that, I'm sure you can add a little bit more flair than I can.
So think about how many times people in business just tell somebody what to do.
Yeah.
Hey Jason, I need the sales numbers. Okay. That's, if I'm your boss and that's very clear what I expect of you, I need the sales numbers. But that'll never be as effective as saying, Jason, would you be able to get me the sales numbers? Because if you come back and go, oh, sure, you're more likely to do it. You have no excuse. You can't say, I didn't hear you, I was busy, or any of those other things. You said you would do it. But we can even get more specific. Jason, can you get me the sales numbers by Tuesday? Because if I were to ask you, if I needed those sales numbers on Friday and I asked for them though on Tuesday, if you happen to say, gosh, I'm really busy, I'm not going to be able to get them on Tuesday, I've got fallback positions. I'm now engaging the principle of reciprocity by conceding a little bit. But then layer on top of that, using the word because. Jason, would you be able to get me the sales numbers by Tuesday because I need them to finish the board report? That's an entirely different communication than just saying, I need the sales numbers. I need the sales numbers. It's quick, it's expedient, it's what people typically do, but it is not a good influence approach. If I'm always asking, I'm giving reasons, I'm having fallback positions because I'm giving you dates, I will get what I need far more. And as a leader in an organization, a manager, a salesperson, if I'm getting more of those yeses from people, that's what's going to be the difference between my success and somebody else that I'm competing against.
And also, I'm going to throw in and but. When we talk linguistically about continuing the conversation, there's lots of dating shows out there and all of that, and they come up and they go, I really like you, I think you're really special, but you got that big but. So when you pull out that but and you put and in there, it sounds a lot more favorable, as if you're continuing the conversation. Can you highlight that as well?
Sure. Using the word but disqualifies for the most part what comes first. If you are married or have a significant other, you get this. Honey, I love you, but, right? And you forget the I love you and you're ready for the hammer that's going to come down on you. So when you understand that, you have to, as a thoughtful communicator and an influencer, you have to say, what is it that I want somebody to walk away with? And how I structure that. So for example, if my company had a great quarter in terms of sales, but not on the profit side. If I went out and said to everybody, hey, last year record sales, but we lost money, that's going to be a downer. Now, maybe you want them focused on the profitability side. Maybe that's what you're going to focus on to change. But if you're trying to uplift people because you can overcome that, you might want to say, hey, I'm going to be upfront with everybody. We lost money last year, but it was the best sales year that we ever had. And people leave feeling good because it's that you've still shared the same two things, but how you shared them made a huge difference in terms of how people felt when they left that meeting. So you need to strategically think, what do I want people to walk away with? If I'm a manager and I'm having to confront an employee about behavior that's not acceptable, let's say they're coming in late. I don't want to say, hey, Joe, you've been coming in late and that's really becoming an issue with the department, but we love you. You're doing great work. Keep it up. Joe Lee focused on, I do great work and I just need to keep it up. You want to acknowledge that up front and then say, but the fact that you're coming in late is really detrimental to the department. People are starting to complain. That has to change. I want Joe to leave that meeting focused on what needs to change. So I'd be very thoughtful about how I use that word, but, because what's coming first is somewhat disqualified.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I love that sort of framing of the language for positive, but also we talk about scarcity as well, which is one of those things that Apple used to do really well when they first released the Apple phones. They'd only have X, or they tell you they'd only have X amount in the store, and there'd be 200 or 300 people queuing down the street, but they'll only have 300 or 200 iPhones. So you're in there intently, you're going, I want one. And that's what happens. How can we utilize that in an effective way, especially now within the sales process?
Well, so scarcity, for people who aren't familiar with the term, scarcity says that we value things more when we believe they're rare or they're going away.
Yeah.
And our ability to frame whatever it is that we're talking about in terms of what somebody might lose by not going along with what we're sharing can make a big difference. So think about this, Jason. I've often shared the example that University of California performed energy audits, and then they went back to homeowners and they gave them ideas to make their homes more energy efficient. They shared the very same recommendations. The only difference in their short presentation was how they ended it. With one group, they ended saying, now, if you do the things we've recommended today, if you're like the typical homeowner, you'll save about $180 next year on your electric bill. Another group, same presentation, but they ended it by saying, now, if you don't do the things that we've recommended today, if you're like the typical homeowner, you will lose about $180 next year on your electric bill because you're going to overpay. It's the same $180. I can frame it as a gain or a loss. And that will motivate some behavior because people didn't know that they could maybe save money. But what the research says is if I talk about what they'll lose, that they're going to overpay, many more people will take action because we hate the thought of losing. And in that particular, a little bit of research, 150% more people who were told they would lose the 180 actually went and implemented the recommendations. So I think the takeaway for your listeners is, whatever the positive things are that you offer in terms of your product or service, can you step back and think about, how can I reframe that into what somebody loses by not going along with what I'm recommending? Not in a fear mongering way, not in a scare tactic, but just honestly being able to say, if you don't do this, you're going to lose $180. You're going to just overpay on your electric bill. You don't want to overpay on your electric bill. And people go, yeah, I don't want to do that. So they make the changes that are good for them too.
I like the way that you framed that. I was just also thinking of how you could frame that for a business owner like myself that has, just as an example, had a learning platform. I'm looking at getting a learning platform. But how could you frame that in the scarcity model? Because I've seen some really bad examples out there that people are saying, it's limited downloads, but that doesn't work because that you can download as many times as you want. So how could I frame that for myself to use an authentic way of a scarcity model for a learning platform?
So there may be a scarcity in terms of what they can get from you versus what they can get from other learning platforms, right?
Okay.
So and you never want to talk negatively about competitors, but you might be able to say, Jason, as a consumer, as a learner, you've got lots and lots of options, and there are some really good options, LinkedIn Learning, Cornerstone, but what they don't offer is, and then you start talking about what you do offer, right? So you're framing it as they have all this good stuff, but they don't have this. This is what you'd be missing out on if you go that route. It may be in terms of price. It could be that some of those other platforms are significantly more expensive. And then again, you could talk about, hey, they're great platforms, but you really want to pay that much more when you can get the same or better quality here? So again, it's really just trying to step back and authentically and conversationally talking about what they might miss out on by not making the choice to go with your learning platform
Mhm.
as opposed to somebody else. But I agree with you. Don't put out there limited downloads, limited availability, because unless your system crashes, which is going to take a massive amount of people, it's not really limited.
Yeah, it's yeah. From the one I saw was just really bad. I looked at it and it was a big influence out there, and I just thought that was a really bad frame for them to do that. Something I'm thinking of actually. I'm putting together a leadership course, but how can leaders now, especially now, be more effective at communicating online, in the Zoom or whatever, to motivate their staff, their sales staff, or their staff in general to be and feel better about themselves, number one, but also to be motivated and have that ability to just go, well, I just need to run on my own steam here. This is the way of the world.
That's a great question, because I'm actually going to be talking about it at a conference at the end of April, where we talk about culture and how do we use what Robert Cialdini called persuasion when he came out with that book in 2016. And there are so many things that impact how we think, how we feel, and how we behave. And if we can tap into that before we even start messaging directly to people, before we make that ask of what we want from them, if we can get them in the right frame of mind, it makes it easier for them to adopt the behavior that we perhaps need.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. There's some research where somebody would walk into a grocery store. So let's say you walk into a grocery store, Jason, and I greet you and I say, hi, I work for a marketing firm. We represent ABC company. They've come out with a new type of pop. And we're asking customers, if you're willing to give us your email address, we'll send you an email with coupons for free samples. In that direct ask, 33% of people said sure, and they willingly gave their email. At a different time, 76%, so 2.5 times more people said yes to the very same request. The difference, they used a persuasive approach. When the person would walk in, I would greet you and I'd say, excuse me, do you consider yourself to be adventurous, the kind of person who likes to try new things?
Mm-hmm.
We can all think of a time or two where we were adventurous, and we all try new things all the time. So nearly everybody said yes to that. And that's where the person would then step in and say, I work for the marketing firm, yada, yada, yada. And the fact that they were all of a sudden in an adventurous state of mind, like to try new things, completely changed how most people responded to that request. So when you think about interacting in this online world, the question would be, first, what is the optimal state of mind you want your employees in so they can perform at their best level? What can I do beforehand? That might be some messaging before the meeting. It might be sights, sounds, or surroundings as you start your meeting that get people from maybe being in the doldrums to being a little more upbeat. Then all of a sudden they're more willing to adopt the changes or whatever you're asking of them. So that's a whole separate bit of psychology that we teach, but it's incredibly important to set up the moment so people are optimal in terms of their willingness to receive what you're offering.
I find that area fascinating because I think now, especially now, it's so imperative that leaders needed to lead from the front or lead from the back, whichever position that they like to be in. But it's those incremental moments that is to help motivate them forward.
Yes. Can I share a quick story that will really illustrate that?
Yeah.
I did not know what I was doing when I was 22, I think at the time, or 23. When I started my career in insurance, very first day of work, I see this lady, Jane. And I'm like, wow, she's really good looking. She thought I was, literally, she said, thought I was an egghead. But a few weeks later, I was no longer going out with a girl I'd been dating for a long, long time. And I had started dating Jane, and everything was awesome until later that fall, the old girlfriend called. And it really threw me for a loop. And all of a sudden, I'm like trying to weigh my options. You know, I was with her for a long time, but I really love Jane. And what am I going to do? And I was back and forth between these two women for 6 months. I mean, literally, it was November, December, January, February, March, April. I mean, I was back and forth. And when I saw Jane in the break room one day, we still worked together. And I said, how are you doing? And she said, great. And then she goes, if you ask me out again, I'm not going out. I'm done. I'm not putting up with your indecision. And who could blame her? But the problem was I'd settled things in my heart. And I was really thinking, Jane's the one I want to be with. In fact, I was thinking I wanted to marry her. So if you would have known me, you would have said, do not do that. You've been struggling for 6 months. Do not ask that girl to marry you. And if you had known her, you would have said, don't do it. He's been unable to commit. Do not do it. So I knew I was going to need to do something big. And this is where persuasion comes in. On her birthday, which was May 14th, 1987, I sent her a dozen roses at work. Of course, she liked how that felt. She liked the attention. And I had asked her if I could take her to dinner for her birthday. And she said yes. So I showed up at her apartment with another dozen roses and a bottle of wine. Now she's thinking, this is a pretty good birthday. We get ready to leave, and I had rented a Silver Cloud Rolls Royce and chauffeur to drive us to downtown Columbus, about a 15-minute drive downtown. And then we had dinner atop one of the tallest buildings in the city. We rode this glass elevator up over 30 stories, had a romantic dinner overlooking the skyline, rode the glass elevator back down, and in the back of the Rolls on the drive home, I popped the question, and she said yes. Now, Jason, I could have asked her that day in the break room. I could have said, Jane, I'm sorry for the indecision. I love you. Will you marry me? And I'm sure she would have said no. But I used a persuasive approach, romance. I put her in a romantic state of mind, almost like a fairy tale kind of thing. And she said yes. And that was an example. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was an example of persuasion. And I will tell you, it's had a happy ending. We just had our 33rd anniversary earlier this month.
That's incredible. That actually reminds me of I went to New Zealand with my now wife, and we were going up Fox's Glacier, or one of the big glaciers, and it was baking hot. And I had it in my mind, this is the right day. This is like beautiful setting, glacier there, mountains there, and all of that. It was so hot. She got in a right strop and a right mood. She's going to hate me for this, but she was in a right grump because she was dehydrated. And I insisted to go to the bottom of the glacier. At that point, I went, no, I'm not going to do it here. So I left it, I paused it for a few days, and found a beautiful hotel with a beautiful scenery, rolling hills, mountains, and all of that. And that was the right time. So I framed it, and literally 20 years later, we're still together now. So
congratulations.
Slightly the same, almost the same, but I had to do it in a different place. So I just want to throw a question at you, actually.
Okay.
So you've just come back from a wonderful 2-week holiday in Florida somewhere. Where's your creative space, and how do you use it, and how do you know that you're in it?
My creative space starts in the morning. Every morning I go out and I walk a few miles. It takes about 30 minutes. And that is a time for me to think and pray and contemplate and just get away from everything to where my mind can just wander, and all of a sudden thoughts and ideas come. The creative space where I then get work done. My best work, I think, is when I go to coffee shops and I can experience a different environment. I can people watch a little bit. Sometimes I run into friends, which is really great. So I just like getting out of the house. Although I love my house, I like being in some different environments, and I enjoy coffee. So that's probably where I'm most productive. Prior to the pandemic, a typical day for me was out the door at 7:30 or 8 in the morning and at a coffee shop till 11:30 or 12, and then come home and answer the emails and do the phone calls and all that kind of stuff associated with the business.
Awesome. Another question, hopefully this can, if you were interviewing you, what sort of questions would you ask yourself?
I said earlier that there's probably not a question you'll ask me that I haven't been asked, but that's one that I've not been asked. If I was interviewing myself, the question I might ask, boy, that's challenging because I know me. So I would say, I guess if I look back, I might wonder, why didn't you start some of this earlier? Some of this being, I'm really into self-development, and I've always been into athletics, running and weightlifting, taekwondo, things like that. I really didn't get rolling with the self-development on the learning part until probably my late 30s. Now, when it hit me, then I was voracious in terms of doing it. I used to read a book a week, and I just would consume as much information as possible. But up until that time, not so much. So I have a lot of admiration for young people when I get together and somebody's, maybe 25 or 30, and they're already on that path. And I think, oh, good for you. You're going to be so much further ahead of the game. So I've not explored that question. So that's probably one that I would ask myself. Why didn't you start that earlier? What do you think was holding you back from doing more of that?
Awesome. And I'm going to throw you off one more time. That wasn't the fly. I just made that one up. But if you had a magic pill for a moment and you swallowed it, but it would turn you into some sort of superhero, or you have a magic power, but you only had it for a certain amount of time. There's your scarcity there for 5 or 10 minutes. How would you use it? And what would you use it for?
Boy, 5 or 10 minutes is not a lot of time to affect change. And I think there's a lot of change that needs to happen in the world. I think it might be to have a platform. If you go totally out of the box, okay, I want to have a platform where the entirety of the world can hear me, and I can have an opportunity to share something that might impact millions or more, billions of people's thinking for just a moment and get them to act more decent and civilly towards each other. And I'll give you an example of something that, I don't know, it just comes right to mind. There was a meme that was going around on social media a while ago, and it was from the rapper Eminem.
Oh, yeah.
And it said, I don't care if you're black or white, gay or straight, male or female. If you treat me with respect, I'll treat you with respect. And everybody's applauding online. Yeah, that's my religion and all this good stuff. But Jason, if you stop and think about it, what he is saying is, I'm waiting for you to treat me with respect. And when you do, then I'll treat you with respect. In other words, it's like he's turned away here waiting, and the other person might be turned away waiting. And I would say the right thing is, I don't care if you're black or white, male or female, gay or straight. Mm-hmm. I will treat you with respect. And I hope you'll treat me with respect in return. In other words, I'm going to extend the very thing that I want from you, and I hope you're generous enough to reciprocate and give it to me. And when I tell people this, they kind of look and you can see the wheels turning, and they're like, you're right. That's what makes sense. I should be extending the forgiveness, the kindness, the respect, the grace, all of those things. I need to extend that. And most people will reciprocate. And the ball gets rolling then. And so that would be my platform.
And to be honest with you, you've already done that in advance of us speaking, because you put my logo up there, you put my picture up there. So you've gained my respect. So I've met you in the middle, and I've actually gone, well, that's absolutely wonderful to actually do that. So yeah, you immediately got that respect. So Brian, how can people find out more about you and the books that you've done and all of that sort of wonderful stuff?
Okay. The two best ways are LinkedIn. So I would encourage anybody who's listening, reach out to me to connect on LinkedIn. I absolutely will accept. If you don't put a message in about that you heard me on the podcast, I guarantee you I will send a message back and ask, how did you find me? I like to understand why people are reaching out. But more importantly, I think it puts the social back in social media, because then we can have a little bit of a conversation. I might get to know you, you get to know me. I'm a real person that you connected with. The second place would be my website, which is influencepeople.biz, B-I-Z. Oh, there it is, going across the bottom. If people go out there, they're going to see all kinds of free resources. I've been on more than 100 podcasts. I've been blogging weekly for more than a dozen years. There's videos, there's intro videos to the LinkedIn learning courses that I've done. There's links over to the books. Those aren't free. You buy them on Amazon, but there's a tremendous amount of free resources for people who want to learn more. So those would be the two spots that I would drive people to.
That's absolutely awesome. And I put down here, but for the audio people, that they won't see this ticker below, it says influence people, powerful opportunities to persuade that are lasting and ethical. Was named, just not going quick enough for my language, was named one of the top 100 influence books of all time by Book Authority. And you have a new book, Persuasive Selling, if I can get my language out today. And you're working on another book. Is that right?
I am. The first book is more of a psychology book, introducing the principles of influence and talks about decision making. Then it looks at application in business, social media, case studies. The second book is obviously a sales book. And there are some people who will never pick up a psychology or a sales book. So my third book is going to be a story format. I see that stories are very popular in the business genre right now. And I wanted to challenge myself and think, could I actually write a story about somebody? And so this book is about a young man named John Andrews, who takes you from the moment he's born and a little bit in his childhood, but he goes to college and he learns a little bit about psychology and in particular influence. And he doesn't really get it too much until he gets out in the work world. And then he starts in a sales role and he starts to go, oh, this really can help me in sales. And then he learns from coaches and mentors and bosses and clients. And he's really starting to assemble all this information, and he views it as a puzzle, and he's trying to put it together to really come up with his own philosophy on life. And so it follows him through. It talks about him getting married and having kids, all the aspects that we go through through the course of our life. And I think I'm onto something good, Jason, because
I like it.
The person who can be most critical, because she loves me the most, is my wife. And we were listening to the book. I have an app where I can download it from Google Docs to listen and make sure it sounds right. And we were driving out to see her parents one day, and we were listening to it. And I overheard her tell somebody, she said, we were listening to this book Brian's writing. And she goes, I couldn't believe he wrote it. It sounded like a real novel. So I guess that's a thumbs up from the most important person in my life.
Oh, wow. I can't wait. When is that expected to come out?
I'm shooting for before the end of the year. I'd really like to get it done by the end of the third quarter, because I'd like it to be available as you move into the holiday season for people who would like to do it. But it's going to be called The Influencer, with the subtitle Secrets to Success and Happiness. Because I really believe, Jason, that what I teach, if people internalize it and utilize it, it will help them enjoy more professional success and more personal happiness at home in their non-work relationships.
I totally concur and totally agree with that statement. But thank you so much for today, Brian. You've been absolutely incredible, and appreciate everything that you've helped. Because I always think about feeding forward and giving people lots of golden nuggets of knowledge so they can learn and they can grow. Obviously, they can find out more about yourself and so on and so forth. But absolutely, it completely resonates with me. So thank you very much. You've been listening to The Global Sales Leader. My name's Jason Cooper, if I can say it correctly. And Brian Ahern has been my phenomenal guest. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.